And so with LMDB in place, right, we have workers that can read and write to LMDB, which allows us to run parallel queries. And so PQR was a huge advancement for us. I think we saw up to like 40% reduction in query running time, and build times went down. We had a goal, I think it was like we're trying to look for at least 20% reduction in build times, and I think we hit 26%. So all cool wins, you know?
The following is my conversation with Abhi Aiyer and Ward Peeters, two lead engineers behind Gatsby Cloud and the recently announced Gatsby V4, which is at the forefront of what I think is the most significant change in the Jamstack landscape in the past 2 years. We discussed how parallel query running, PQR, and deferred static generation, DSG, are achieving 40% faster queries and 300% faster overall builds. And they did a wonderful job handling the most impolite questions I could think of, including whether Gatsby Cloud is a Netlify clone, whether Gatsby should just be a data layer on top of Next.js, and how they're dealing with TMA, too many acronyms, in web development. This conversation should be viewed together with my past discussions with Sunil Pai and Mishko Hevri in considering the cutting edge of web development today. Online discussions often present a binary split in that your technical choices either have to optimize for developer experience or user experience. But I find that it is builders like Abhi and Ward and Mishko and Sunil who are constantly trying to improve the experience of developers in building great user experiences by default. I hope you enjoy these long-form conversations I'm trying to produce with amazing developers. I still don't have a name for it, and I still don't know what the plan is. I just know that I really enjoy it, and the feedback from you guys have been really great. So if you like this, share it with a friend. If you have other requests for guests, tag them on social media. I basically like to make this a space where passionate builders and doers can talk about their craft and where things are going. So here's the interview.
I'm Abhi Aiyer. I'm a principal engineer at Gatsby. Thanks for having us.
My name is Ward Peeters. I'm a staff software engineer at Gatsby, and I'm from Belgium, and I've been working mostly on the open source side.
I forgot to say where I'm from. I'm from Los Angeles, Hollywood. Nice. I'm just kidding.
I'm actually heading down to LA in a couple of weeks. I'm going to KubeCon, which is like a
nice,
very interesting thing for a front-end engineer to end up at. But that's where my career has taken me. So this conversation started because I had a chat with Sunil on this podcast that I accidentally launched. I don't think we did Gatsby much a good favor. Like, we both saw the new updates, and I didn't get to say the nice things that I thought about Gatsby. I should also say that I used to have my blog on Gatsby, and I no longer do. I used to work at Netlify, and now I no longer do. There's a lot of history here for me with Gatsby. It's been a while since I caught up, and I'm curious to see or get the latest. Maybe we should start off with like a quick summary of what's new with Gatsby V4, right? Is that a good place to start?
Yeah, I think so.
So first of all, I think the marketing was really nice. Gatsby Camp, it seems like a really big push and qualitatively very different from Gatsby 3. Tell me about what the behind the scenes was like.
Yeah, and it was, we're getting better at the marketing side of what we're doing these days. And Gatsby 4 was a big push. It really changed how we approach the framework as a whole. For those who don't know, traditionally Gatsby was a static site generator, purely static. We hold ourselves high on our connections to content management systems, and we provide a really good data layer there that takes all those requests that you would normally make to a content management system, turns them into a store of data that you can then use and query from GraphQL. And the big thing that we were hitting before Gatsby 4 was, as our company was growing and as more customers were using Gatsby Cloud, we started realizing that we couldn't scale to really large sites. And large sites is like a misnomer. Like, you could be a 50,000 page site and be considered large given the data that you may have. But we're talking like hundreds of thousands of pages now. And the thing that we kind of realized is not all pages are created equal on your site, especially the ones from like 2015, 2014, where, no one's looking at those pieces of content. If you're a site with a huge archive of content, Yeah, you should probably go check Google Analytics to see how many people are actually viewing your pages. And the way Gatsby, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but today Gatsby isn't as smart as it should be in what pages should be rebuilt. For example, we're looking at the gatsbyjs.com page right here, but there are other data dependencies, not this pure content. Like if you look at the nav bar, there's a whole bunch of items there. And we have this nav bar on all of our pages because that's what a website has. But the problem with Gatsby today, and will be changed in the future, is like, if I change anything about this nav bar, any page that depends on the nav bar now has a dependency that needs to be invalidated. And so now I have 100,000 pages with this nav bar. I have 200,000 pages with this nav bar. And I spelled Gatsby instead of Gatsby or something in the nav bar. I made a typo. And now I'm paying for 100,000 pages of reload to rebuild. And so we just saw that, and that this happens a lot, right? This is a very small example, but this happens a lot to our customers. And building 100,000 pages is not necessarily an easy thing to do. There's memory requirements that come in. There's what kind of machine are you doing this thing on? And so we had to figure out a way to scale Gatsby and do things differently. We were traditionally static, and now we're trying to be somewhere in between. You can go dynamic, or you could go static, and it's up to you.
So the new rendering options are SSG, DSG, and SSR. Is ISR gone?
Well, that's what Next.js is doing. And
did Gatsby never have? I thought Gatsby had an incremental mode.
Incremental builds.
What we call it, yes.
Yeah.
But that's still all statically. So what we do, we have it in open source where with v3 we enabled it, where we only build HTML what's necessary. On cloud we have a more pumped up version of it, where when you get a data change, we only update that page more rapidly than in open source. But still, when you change your navbar with what Abhi said, you still have to rebuild everything because all the pages get invalidated. So incremental builds works for data updates, but not so much for code changes.
Right. Okay. Well, I guess, how do you solve cache invalidation?
But well, the thing is that because Gatsby owns the data, like has a data layer, and source plugins like WordPress, when we source data, when they give us a webhook, or we just go to WordPress and say like, hey, what has changed? They tell us like, okay, these nodes have changed, or these pieces, like a post, a page has been changed. And Gatsby knows which node is used where. Like, for example, this post is used on this section page, it's used in this article. And that's all happening already behind the scenes because GraphQL shenanigans under the hood. And that's how we can build incremental builds. So we know, okay, only these pages need to be built. And that's also where DSG comes in, because as a user, you don't have to care about caching validation anymore, because it's using the same engine as you were used to with like incremental builds when you use SSG. So, and I think that's a major benefit of it, where you as a user don't really have to care about cache control, because it is difficult to manage on a large scale. Like a lot of corporations just say like every 10 minutes we'll remove the cache, because it is difficult to get triggers when things change.
Yeah,
that's pretty funny. At Netlify, one of the reasons that we constantly talk about for CDN level caching, like people say like, why don't you just enable CDN level caching and then just have a regular server render? One of Matt Billman's points that he always makes is that people always turn it off the moment there's a bug. It's like, oh, it's a caching problem, turn it off, and then don't turn it back on again. Okay, so let's talk about like DSG. That's the fancy new one, and DPR, right? So maybe we should. Is there? Yeah, there's a graphic. Okay, all right. This is new. So first of all, like, what was the inspiration? What's the backstory? I'm always interested in how these things come about.
I think we were inspired by DPR a lot, but where we saw the benefit of our approach is our data layer, and there was many steps even before getting to DSG. So it started actually in like Gatsby 3.10. We had to redo Gatsby's node store. So traditionally we were using Redux to persist all these data we get from content management systems. And we had a particular customer who could not even persist the cache, like a Gatsby cache between builds, because they had so much data that it would OOM when they try to persist the cache, right? So for them, they were running cold builds for every build. Even if you had like a warm cache or you had your pods, we use Kubernetes. So like if you have your pods up, you're doing like an hour and a half cold build for everything. You could like change a typo and it'd be an hour and a half. And so from there, we were like, okay, we need to reduce peak memory utilization, and Redux is not going to help us there. And so we started looking into alternatives. We looked at SQLite, we looked at Redis, and we landed on LMDB, which is Lightning Memory Mapped Database Manager. It's like a file system DB, which is really cool for us because one, it's pretty fast. It allows you to have like a query interface, which is good. You can store more data than available RAM. So for a site like this customer who pretty much is blowing up the spot on every warm build, to try to even have a warm build, we could actually store their data now, which then unlocked warm builds for them. So an hour and a half went to 25 minutes, which is pretty good for them. Now we have this thing. Now we call it Gatsby DB internally. And so now Gatsby's node store is in LMDB. And the cool thing about LMDB is it's just comprised of a bunch of files. You have a lock file and database files. And if you have files, that means you can move files around. They don't have to be in one place, right? They could be in storage. They can be in a serverless function. They could be anywhere you really want, right? And so that was step one, was we need to redo the node store. And we did that, and memory utilization from a lot of customers went down enough to unlock a simple thing as a warm build.
Yep.
So the second thing that these other customers were having was like, wow, it takes so long to run queries, right? And people have like 25,000, 50,000 queries. And I don't know if they should have those that much, but they do, right? They do have that much. And it's a huge part of the build time, right? A lot of people complain that, Gatsby builds are sometimes slow for large sites. And we agree, that's totally true. And so our next foray into like improvement was this thing called parallel query running, which would allow Gatsby to run chunks of queries at a given time. And what PQR, and here's a cool diagram of it, query running does take a huge percentage of your build, but now we can parallelize that across workers in the Gatsby process. But if you were to do this naively with Redux, like a child process can't write to a JavaScript object in the main process, right? It's hard to maintain state. There's no easy way to communicate between workers to write state and read it. And so with LMDB in place, we have workers that can read and write to LMDB, which allows us to run parallel queries, right? We don't need to do things serially anymore. And so PQR was a huge advancement for us. I think we saw up to like 40% reduction in query running time, and build times went down. We had like a goal, like I think it was like we're trying to look for at least 20% reduction in build times, and I think we hit 26%. So all cool wins, And so then Ward and I and the team, we're all just like thinking like, okay, we have LMDB, we got PQR. All right. Well, really, we have a Gatsby data layer that can be accessed from anywhere, right? Because if you can access it from a worker, you can access it in a serverless function, a cloud run, on your somewhere, anywhere, you can spin up your own machine in your own office if you wanted.
Well, static host. How about that? Like an S3 bucket.
You could put it in an S3 bucket for sure. Like you could put those files there and then retrieve them from wherever you want. And so that's when we started thinking like, okay, we have this information now. What can we do to improve the life of our users even more? And then we started thinking about DPR, and like we saw the approach and we were like, wow, this is exactly what we need. But we have Gatsby's data layer that kind of complicates things, but it's not complicated anymore because we can essentially use the data layer wherever we want. So I'll let Ward kind of go from there on like how DSG came about after these like fundamental pieces.
Yeah, so then we looked at like ISR, DPR, like what's the difference in both of them? And then we saw like ISR, that's where you have a refresh timeout. And now with, I think, the latest Next, you can also ping an endpoint so they can invalidate the cache, but it's all manual work. And there were many complaints about, hey, that's in Next, it's not in Gatsby. And they complained about stale data because what Next does is you visit the page and then the next time it will update. So I think it's refresh or something. Yeah.
All right. Well, we don't have to dig through issues on our call, but I just wanted to illustrate the problem.
Yeah, and then that's where we took it away and then said, okay, DPR. And then I looked at the spec of DPR, like, okay, can we use the same name or not? And the problem with DPR was that they had atomic deploys. So every change means blow the whole cache away and do everything new. And we were like, but we have incremental builds runner. We don't want to invalidate the whole cache. We just want to invalidate the pages that got removed. And there's like a GitHub discussion about it where I commented as well. And it felt like they didn't want to change the name. Or Pete. Yep.
There you go. So you said to me, DPR doesn't need to be opinionated about if the file is part of the atomic deploy. Can you reiterate why?
Yeah, the thing is basically because they mentioned like every deploy needs to blow the cache away and needs to be fresh. And for me, like it shouldn't be in the spec. Like DPR should just say you build pieces at build time and you build pieces at runtime. That's basically what I was trying to say. And then because we have incremental builds, we only want to invalidate like 5 pages. Even if you use SSG or DSG, we still want to say if you only change 5 pages, we invalidate the cache for 5 pages. I couldn't get that from the spec. And I think that's also because Netlify does it their way, which is totally fine. But then that's why we created a new acronym called DPR. And I think it also probably explains what we're after as well a little bit better too, because it's deferred static generation. It's like lazy SSG, something like that, because that's what we do. Like you can mark a page as defer, and that just means we don't do it at build time, but the first time you hit a request, we build it in like a Lambda, like we use Cloud Run, we build it, and then we give the response to a user, and then also we save it to disk. So from there on, the second request, it's technically an SSG page. We store it like you have the CDN cache, but we also have it inside our bucket, like your S3 bucket or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, we're caching responses, but we're also making that file exist as if it existed at build time. And that's a big distinction for us, because what that allows us to do in the future would be like, if nothing changed about the data for the given page, then you don't need to DSG again, right? Like if nothing changes for, let's say like there's 5 builds and build A, something changed in your data dependencies. So now you have a DSG page, and then nothing changed for the next 5 builds. But a user comes and actually visits that page, generates the files, it gets cached in our data layer or our file storage layer. And on build 5, because nothing changed, you're not DSGing again, right? You're not going to go through this process again. Yeah. And so that's what we think is the big thing about DSG.
Yeah, and then I think an extra piece of it is because the data, like you can say it's a benefit or a negative point of Gatsby. Like we source all the data at build time. So even if your APIs go down, even with DSG, you still go to our local database. So that will never go down, because if like your site is down, your database will be down as well, but you're not dependent of other APIs. So let's say GitHub goes down or X go down and you need to get that data. We have it locally in our database, so you're still good to go. So you still keep that resilience and the security even that you're used to have with Gatsby. And I think that's the main benefit of the whole data layer piece of Gatsby and DSG.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Something I always wonder about, like, is this basically the last stage of Jamstack? Like, I feel like we have explored all possible varieties of rendering, and this is like the end. This is it, right? Like we have all the options.
Now it's mixing them together.
Yeah.
That's the next step. Having bits of your page static and then bits of your pieces SSR.
Okay, I'll put it this way. Do you think that Jamstack, at the end of the day, after this maybe like 5-year journey of like, hey, like WordPress sucks. It's everyone moved to static, right? And then we found like, oh yeah, static doesn't scale. Big surprise. We're telling you that from the beginning. And now, okay, right, hybrid. Is that it? Like, was that the Jamstack movement in like a 5-year period?
I think it's like a yes and no. Like evolution is like, I think we're all coming full circle, and I think in engineering particularly, we do the same thing all the time every 10 years or something, right? But where DSG came into play is for use cases that we saw, and our customers still prefer static. So I know we're talking about DSG like it's like a great thing, and it is, but a lot of our customers prefer static, and it's really up to their use case. If you're a small site at a bunch of top of funnel pages, any lag in anything, right? Because DSG is not like instant, right? Like you're doing a runtime build, essentially, right? So in some cases, it could be, it could be a longer response time than what the standard should be. And we have customers that won't DSG anything because they have essentially most pages are top of funnel or high traffic that they would rather just wait. They don't mind waiting for the performance that they would want. But we also have customers that have hundreds of thousands of pages. Like there's one customer that has like a company handbook or something where like you can see every employee and like if they like dogs and like, what I'm saying, like their bios and stuff. And they have a lot of employees worldwide, and they can only, like before DSG, they could only build their site once a week because it takes like 24 hours to build.
What?
And now with DSG, they don't really care about someone who no one's going to view their profile. No offense to that person, but no one's viewing the non-CEO's profile. So then now they can like, and there are other people that are important too, I'm sure, but like now they can actually, make changes to their site. We actually had to work with them to make sure that, they can build. I mean, previous to DSG, they can build like at some cadence that we don't necessarily support, but we help support that. So I think like, static is still king, right? Static is still king when it makes sense, for sure.
I feel like it's a bit scary when you tell people like, okay, you're deferring the build, and then on the first request, someone's going to build that. It's not going to take that long either, right? It's not like it's like that bad. I think bottom line is I think people are very scared whenever you say like, okay, there's a trade-off, but you don't quantify the trade-off. And then they're like, oh, it's bigger in their mind than it really is.
True.
So I think a big problem with the plugin ecosystem is that it's difficult to quantify like what's slow and what's not slow. For example, generating an MDX page is more time consuming because it has to like get some dependencies, make sure that they are bundled together, and then use React to render, and then render again, because that's how the Gatsby plugin is built right now. That takes more time than a simple React render to string with some data. And I think that's the difficult thing to say, like, okay, some pages will be instant, some pages might take a second to build, or half a second, those kind of things.
The important thing is that there are no data dependencies that you're waiting on, right? That's usually the slowest part. You fetch all the data up front, and then you store it in a LMDB cache, and that's written to a serverless function or written to, I guess, your build process or whatever, and then people can render that whenever, which I think is great. Like it should be fairly fast. Like we're talking tens of milliseconds difference between like for first render, right? Like something like that. Like
correct.
I think when you quantify, like, okay, we're talking tens of milliseconds, not hundreds of milliseconds, and not thousands of milliseconds. That really helps people put these things in perspective.
Yeah, but then people always find a way to screw it up. So I'll say that. Like,
of course, but you give a realistic benchmark, and then you go like, for these benchmarks, we tested it like 100 times or something. The median was this, the P95 was that. That's it. Like, I mean, people can't really fault you for not accounting for every use case, because no one can. But at least you can give a reasonable benchmark and say like,
they will. Though.
There's an upper bound to how the trade-off. Like whenever you mention trade-offs, I like to quantify it basically.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. And like one thing to know for DSG is like your data may be like available, and that's cool. That may not be the long pull, but let's say you have a portfolio site that generates 20 different types of images for every image. now you're getting into image processing at runtime, and so there are ways to kind of not do this properly, right? And or like, for example, let's say your homepage, I love this example, your homepage has links like to every other page on your site, and it's all DSG, right? So you load the homepage, and because Gatsby does prefetch for link tags, or you're doing Gatsby link to other pages, we go and prefetch every page on your site, and essentially you're doing your build at runtime. So we're going to try to prevent these cases from happening, but just naively going through DSG everything is not my recommendation. That's for sure.
Okay.
Not today, at least. Not today.
So a couple of things on that. So this Gatsby image point is very interesting. So how does Gatsby image work with DSG? So
yeah, it works how it does in Gatsby build. Currently today, Gatsby uses Gatsby plugin Sharp and the Sharp transformers to take one image, turn it into another. And even in Gatsby Cloud, before we implemented parallel image processing, images were like the slowest part of the Gatsby build because it takes a lot of time, a lot of memory, etc. And so we solved that problem. And so in the DSG runtime, we do image processing there for a particular page. So you will have to wait for image processing if you're image heavy on a DSG page.
Does that mean that you cannot do DSG in a serverless function in a typical?
We actually do DSG in serverless, and that's totally fine. Like you can do image processing, but like I would say your mileage may vary given what kind of transformations you have going on, how many images you have, right?
Yeah.
But like you said, there's trade-offs, right? If the page makes sense for it, we have a bunch of examples that do have images and they work great, but I don't know if like a full-on portfolio with like a, like a masonry thing where like there's like tons of images and they have sub images and you have like a carousel of images and stuff. That may not be good for your user to wait on that. I don't know. But the choice is the users. That's what we're trying to get at, is like, we're trying to give as many options. We're going to give guidance and like we're having our own opinions, but you can choose to listen or not, or, do your own thing. And we should try to support you as much as we can.
Yeah, you give me some thought about like having sort of like a browsers list type of API where you can say like, okay, top 100 most visited pages. No, this is not it. You know what I mean? Like as a hand holding for what should be DSG'd and what should be statically generated, plug into my Google Analytics, tell me like top 100 pages, statically render those, everything else DSG. I'm sure you've thought about it. And I think like maybe 4 years ago, Gatsby and Guest.js had some kind of collaboration, which I assume went nowhere, but let me know if there's any movement on this one.
No, we deprecated the plugin.
Oh, you deprecated it. Okay.
Deprecated that.
For now, because there is a new way to do it, because now with Guest, it stored everything in one file. So we had to like sometimes download a 5 megabyte JSON file to make Guest.js work. And then they switched it around that you could make Guest smarter to say like, okay, for this route, you only need a bit of the JSON file, but we never implemented it. So, but I know Angular has it.
Yeah, and we have this. So I'm speaking from the Gatsby Cloud perspective, but like you're right, Sean. Like if you can hook into Google Analytics, you'll get the same thing. But if you host with Gatsby Cloud, we know what routes coming through our hosting layer. We know what routes for your site are the most hit. We know the requests per route. We know how much bandwidth you're using, like per route, and so we could be smarter and tell people exactly how to DSG, right? How should you DSG and get it done that way for sure.
Okay, so like a to be complete, to be
complete. We're still in beta for Gatsby 4, so I would say like maybe like after we launch for sure, we'll start adding some sugar on top.
Got it. So first of all, I did. So this was my first time trying out Gatsby Cloud. I think it was behind like a sign up wall, like a private beta in the past, and I never really gave it a spin. But the V4 announcement really got me going, and yeah, I mean, I'm pretty impressed. So how much of the hard question, right? How much of this is a Netlify clone? What are you doing differently? Let's talk about that.
How much of like DSG is a Netlify cloud?
No, how much of
think
Gatsby
it's
Cloud
cloud.
is a Netlify clone?
Probably like 0%.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, probably 0% of it is a Netlify clone.
I do like when you provision it, it gives me like a really good set of options. Let's see, this, Connect CMS. Guess Netlify does not have that.
Yeah, I mean, we're far from a Netlify clone, multiple reasons. We've built our whole system based on the needs of Gatsby. The way our cloud front end and our back ends talk to our customers' Gatsby sites is like a novel way of doing it. We've exposed that in open source. And I think Netlify actually did implement something for external jobs or something with Google PubSub. I saw that, but everything we do in Gatsby Cloud is for Gatsby. We have no other framework that we need to maintain nor care about. Sorry,
Yep.
Vooks or whatever. Like, we don't care about that on Gatsby Cloud. We've optimized our hosting layer with Fastly to be part of Gatsby. And so if Gatsby changes, Gatsby Cloud changes. And if we need Gatsby framework to change, it will for Gatsby Cloud. So, and we use Google Cloud, so we're not on AWS. I would say we have the similar features though, and that's a valid point to bring out. We have functions, right? We have domains and all. We don't have purchasing domains or anything yet, but we have the whole hosting product and everything like that.
Got it. Is that what you would need for Gatsby Cloud to come on a beta, like domains, or like what are you waiting for essentially?
Well, Gatsby Cloud isn't in beta. It's like
Gatsby V4 is in beta. Yeah.
V4 is in beta. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. But yeah, domain registry and all that stuff is more sugar on top that we'll be probably releasing mid next year. But we're just trying to be, Gatsby Cloud from that perspective, we just want to be at the table with all the other Jamstack providers. But our edge is, if you want to build a Gatsby site the best way, you have our support team that'll help you, right? As a customer of ours, you're like our family, the Gatsby family. We help our customers. We have great support, and everything we do on the platform is for Gatsby and making Gatsby better. So there's like so many things in the framework that we've improved by having Gatsby Cloud, because we didn't know all the sites that could exist and not do things nicely or have problems, or it's because of Gatsby Cloud that the framework is getting so much better, because we have real users feedback and they have a lot of demands and we like to fulfill them.
Yeah. Okay, actually I should probably have clarified this earlier. How much of what we just talked about is Gatsby Cloud only? Pretty
much all of it. Okay. DSG, SSR, they're all capable. You can run it locally and stuff. And I know Netlify has a Gatsby plugin as well that will allow you to run DSG and SSR as well. For those who are not using those platforms, like maybe you're using Amplify or whatever, you're going to have to implement this yourself. I don't recommend it though, because it was a pain in the ass to put it together. Yeah. But yeah, it should work the best on Gatsby Cloud.
Yeah, so technically all that we're building with V4 is in open source, so you could wire it up all yourself. But why bother if you can use like Gatsby Cloud and that you don't have to care about it?
That's true. Okay, so just on the rendering side of things, right? I made this observation that Gatsby now has SSR, now has serverless rendering, all the different rendering modes. Like this looks very similar to Next.js. Is it possible to basically say like, okay, Gatsby is the data layer and is the best data layer and most advanced or whatever? Because this is basically what Next.js does, right? Like it's a very constrained rendering layer. Why can't you, sunk cost aside, why can't you be a Next.js layer?
Well, technically we could now, because they like implemented everything too. Like they have SSG, they have ISR, they have SSR, and we could technically move the data layer out of and use it with Next. That could be a possibility, but we've gone so far, and I think to already have built this, and then now they're also parity. I think having two separate ones and having different dev experience, and maybe Next is winning now and Gatsby will win in 3 months or vice versa. I think it's just a healthy balance. Like I think it's the same thing as a browser wars. Like everyone is going to Chrome or Chromium, and then there is still like Firefox and iOS, but how long will they survive? And I think just competition is what you need. And I think that's why a good reason why we keep separate. And also, I don't think that Next.js will like merging with Gatsby or like having the same.
Oh, I think no, Next.js would be super happy about it, because like then they win the server rendering for React's role, and then you focus on the data role, right? Like which makes sense to me. Obviously, I'm brushing over a lot of the plugins actually have a rendering portion as well. So True. How much can you separate those things?
If we think of if this is possible, I mean, we're not going to like say that it's happening or anything.
Never say never. Yeah.
Like if we look at Gatsby's, like how it's set up, it's what we call the content mesh. You have all these different data warehouses that exist, WordPress, Drupal, etc. Could even be freaking Google Sheets, like whatever. And we assembled this data layer at build time. And in doing DSG and SSR, we've built something called the query engine that allows you to query this LMDB store that has like the manifested data in there. So it really opens up the gate for, if you want to use our data layer in a Next app, like, I mean, go ahead. Like once we expose this API to our customers, then you can essentially have Gatsby data in an iOS app or an Android app, React Native. Like it's just an API call at that point. And, Gatsby Cloud hosts like a GraphQL API for you that you can just query your data. I don't know if any data scientists would care for that. They could add that into Looker or something, like however they want to do it, like that stuff would be available. And it's almost like a content data lake versus, traditional data lake, I guess. It's purely for content. And you would have the benefits of Gatsby because we normalize and we create structures, and you, like the user, can customize the schema however you want. And then now you can use it on multiple platforms, right? It's not an immediate goal for us to do so. It's a logical next step.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, I feel like that's a really good and in-depth coverage. Maybe let's end off with talking about the future of React 18 and your plans there. First of all, what's happening in React 18? Is it out? Like the plan for the React 18 published in June. Okay. All right. Let's talk about it. What's going on?
So we're working closely with the React team, and we're also in the working group to figure out like, okay, how can we help the team make it more stable and give it in user hands. So I think from May or something, we have introduced React 18 part of Gatsby. So you can now install React 18 alpha, and we just moved to the new rendering mode. So the async mode, suspense, and all those things work. Like what we're planning on, at least when you use Gatsby, like we have page queries and we have static queries, and there's a big pain point in static queries because it's a GraphQL query, but it cannot have any variables, which means you're kind of limited to the use of it. And then you have to move everything to page queries. You kind of have to know all the content up front. And with the new async rendering bits of React, you can do like a use query, because you can yield the rendering of React at any time, because async doesn't mean you have to go use Apollo get server data tree or something, or other pieces where you kind of have to hack React's async mode when you have suspense in SSR. And we can all move it to the page components or the components of your React tree. So it basically looks that you're just recreating a React application, and then every async bits like using React fetch or use query, it all just works. I think that's where React 18 benefits a lot, where it just removes a lot of clutter that you have to do now with Gatsby, where you have to be in the Gatsby mindset when you're developing. And I think you basically go to creating a React app and you have a data layer. But I think React 18 opens so many doors with their new cache APIs. It just becomes way smarter. And when you look at it from a performance perspective, with the whole concurrent mode where inputs get priority over rendering, it's just going to be way smoother than what they had so far. So
and hopefully people stop complaining about lighthouse scores and stuff. Like that'll be great. Another cool thing that React 18 kind of unlocks for Gatsby in particular is a concept of fragments. And so we were talking about that nav bar example earlier with the 100,000 pages. And we want to leverage React 18 with like custom renderers so that we can essentially create fragments of a page that have data dependencies. Because there's no page query or static query anymore, there's just a query. Your nav bar component has a query. And essentially, Gatsby can make that nav bar a nav bar fragment. And your body has a fragment, maybe your footer has a fragment, your sidebar has a fragment. And as data changes incrementally, we only rebuild fragments, and our hosting layer stitches fragments together. This is an old concept called ESI includes. Like if everyone did PHP back in the day, like you're very familiar with this stuff. Like I said, every 10 years, things just come back around. And we're going to try to do that. We're going to try to build fragments of pages, stitch them together so a navbar change doesn't break the bank, But we can only do that once React 18 is like, fully there. I mean, we could do it now, but like, why? When we should just like work off the work of others. So
when you say fragments, are you referring to GraphQL fragments or like HTML?
I think fragment might be maybe we call it like, today, like an HTML page, has specific, I like to call them like the rectangles that we all draw around our websites, right? They all have independent data, isolation, right? And so these are like what maybe a Gatsby slice of a page or a fragment or some type of include, like in the templating days, right? And that's what I kind of mean right there. So these includes or templates or whatever we want to call them would be independently built and then independently stitched at the cache layer. And then, the data dependencies don't cross. And now I'm not building 100,000 pages because I misspelled Gatsby and it should have been Gatsby,
It sounds like it happens a lot.
Oh, it does. Yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah, and it looks a lot like donut caching if you're more familiar with that piece. Like you have a page where as a part has a different cache limit than another one. So that's more or less the technical piece out of it.
Server components, any implications on that for Gatsby?
Not yet, I would say, because they're not going to ship it with React 18. We've been talking about it, but it's still very fresh or very new. Like even the React team hasn't worked more on it. So they did their demo, but then it's got like a little bit stagnated.
Oh my God, really? I'm
because they want all the pieces, like they need to build all the pieces underneath it to make it work. Like making sure that async rendering works.
They jumped they jumped the gun maybe in announcing. I got so excited. I was like, wow, okay, I can cut my JavaScript bundle by 40% and run backend functions in my React component. Wow. And then nothing for 10 months.
Because we are super excited about it too. Because when you look at especially marketing side, like marketing pages or blogs, there's only a small piece of JavaScript that you actually need. Like maybe you need a bit for your newsletter button or your something like that. And why 200 kilobytes of JavaScript when you technically only need maybe 10, 20 kilobytes? So I think with static or with like marketing pages, you can remove a lot of those bits.
Yeah, so the world was server rendered. Then we went client-side rendered. Then we went static rendered. Now we're DSG rendered, and then we're going to go back to server rendered. So, time just keeps spinning.
Partially server. I called it smart server versus smart clients is my term for it. So this is I think maybe my most recent post, because I have been trying to write more, but then I keep having real life get in the way. But why is traditional, which is server rendered, different from the new server rendered? We have it's essentially exactly the same, but there's a thin runtime of JavaScript. The stuff that we send over the wire changes, and we're actually doing rendering in the browser, but like partial rendering, maybe I should say. And I mean, I don't know. I think this is a very interesting exploration. Phoenix Live View is also the other one that gets a lot of love for this And then Rails is also adopting Hotwire. So I don't know where this goes. I mean, it seems like we fully explored the smart client space, and the smart server revolution is just kind of getting going.
Yeah. We're all going back to Meteor.
Back to Meteor, but not so opinionated, I think. You know, I was very excited about Meteor. Like when I first got into web dev, like I was like, yeah, okay, everything's in there. I actually mentioned Meteor here because it had the mini Mongo data store, which I thought was just such a great experience. Did you used to work at Meteor?
No. Yeah. But my last company, we used Meteor for our back end, and then we had to kind of migrate slowly off of it.
Yeah,
that's because they were just ahead of their time. You know, now all those concepts are like, those are the concepts of today, right? And that's the beautiful thing. They were just ahead of their time.
I mean, you know, what they did was they became Apollo.
Yep.
Right? And then they were just like, oh, no one's handling all the hard parts like GraphQL. Okay, we'll do it.
Yeah, they did a great job at that too.
Which is, by the way, like in terms of just I'm interested in startups, entrepreneurship. You know, we work so hard in web dev stuff. A lot of this we never charge a cent for, and someday I would like to make money on the smart things that we do in tech. Taking an underspecified spec, which most of the times is intentionally underspecified, and then building all the hard parts around it is a very interesting formula for success. So essentially, React is an underspecified framework, and Next.js came in and went like, okay, we'll build get initial props that you guys forgot, and great, very successful. Gatsby, same thing. And then Apollo and Relay, by the way, but Relay was not a serious company effort. I mean, Relay is a serious effort. It's not a startup that was like existentially relying on like on success. Whereas Apollo was like, okay, GraphQL is underspecified. There's a reference JS implementation, but no one's building the production quality standard. We'll do it. And and yeah, like it's really interesting because as the spec grows or as adoption of the thing grows, you grow with it and you serve the audience, and you also capture a lot of the value, and you essentially have Facebook working for you in the sense of like, or the spec maintainers, you know, whatever the spec is, they're working for you because every time they contribute to the spec, you win.
Mm-hmm. True.
Yeah, maybe that's what's going to happen with DPR, right?
Like, the naming sucks. Too many 3-letter acronyms, and like I'm sure, like look, like you and I and everyone in like the web dev like Twitter sphere or whatever, we don't mind new things and like understanding the differences and nuances. But anyone who's like just a regular web dev or just like not web dev but talking to web devs, they think we're crazy. This is actually bad. Like we look like the nerds who are like talking about all these minor differences and inventing new acronyms for them. I don't know how to fix it. Jargon is important for specialists to understand in a very short amount of time the differences between what we're referring to. Jargon is important, but we don't do our industry a favor when we have all these acronyms and then people just throw them onto a page or a blog post or a slide deck, and then people just go like, okay, the JS ecosystem is crazy.
You end up explaining the same thing all the time, right? Because you use some acronym. It was funny, like on the way to Gatsby Camp, like we had like all of the releases in Gatsby 4 have acronyms. We have like PQR, parallel query running, DSG, SSR, SSG. Man, we were like trying to figure out how many more acronyms can we fit to get like the acronym count up. But it's a serious problem for us too, because some of our customers have never used Gatsby before. They're coming from a full-on WordPress background, and our sales team, marketing, we all need to be able to convey like, yeah, this is what it really is, and this is what it means. And maybe the acronym sticks after they understand it, but that's a really uphill battle to explain right on the way. So I would love if a community, we all got together and like kind of just understood it. You know, it's kind of like the GraphQL spec, have a formal definition for what this is. Don't be too heavy-handed on approach. Let people implement however they want to. And then it's just a concept that has different flavors.
Yeah. Oh, different flavors. Okay. That'd be interesting. Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you wanted to shout out?
This is fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you too.
Yeah, I love catching up. And fun fact, we're actually at my workplace. We use Docusaurus right now for our docs. We're actually considering moving to Gatsby.
Nice.
Not something I thought I would do this year, but we're running into enough limitations with Docusaurus that we are essentially customizing so much that we don't get much benefit anymore. So maybe a good like standard docs implementation would be interesting for you guys actually. Because a lot of reason that people pick Docusaurus is basically it has docs in the name, and it's got a lot of good defaults for docs, right? And Gatsby maybe doesn't have such a developed theme for docs.
We mostly push people to the Apollo team. Like they have a great, like the whole Apollo site is, or doc site is built with Gatsby, and they open source the building blocks that they use. So you could start from there, and then
Jake,
New
right?
Relic as well. New Relic's doc site is with Gatsby, and they're working on something similar too.
Awesome. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thanks for those pointers. I'm actually going to go explore them.
Yeah, if you need help, just let us know.
Yeah, if you need any help, for sure.
Yeah, we'll do. And there's no reason why we shouldn't move to Gatsby Cloud if that makes sense for us as well. Okay, hey, Ward and Abhi, thanks so much. And this is really great chatting. Thanks for reaching out. And yeah, I hope people will try out Gatsby.
Yeah, same. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Have a great weekend.
Have a great one. Bye.